Guys and gals, there's only three things that are certain in this life: death, taxes, and everything being turned into a roguelite. I mean, we got a poker roguelite, a slot machine roguelite, and a breakout roguelite before we got GTA 6. And I was gonna say, I haven't seen a racing roguelite yet, but don't worry, I googled it and somebody's already taken care of it. So, on today's roguelite mashup, we got Rogue Souls. Case in point, Tyrants Realm. Released in January 2025, this retro-looking dungeon crawler is heavily inspired by From Software's brutal action RPG franchises, featuring a slow and methodical combat system that relies on rolling, parrying, and timing your strikes in order to avoid being sliced and diced by your extremely lethal enemies. Like in most roguelites, the goal of Tyrants Realm is to clear a sequence of areas, each with a boss at the end, until you reach the final level, hopefully with the right gear and enough combat experience to kill the big boss. As usual, this is a mission you'll have to repeat several times before you succeed, because the game is engineered to be difficult and requires some grinding. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called a dungeon crawler, it would be a dungeon drive-thru. And so you put on your prisoner rags, you leave your cell, and begin your quest to slay the tyrant. But probably not before you turn off some of these lo-fi video effects. As you can clearly tell, Tyrants Realm's aesthetics are roughly based on the old PS1 style graphics, much like, for example, another game that's been featured on the channel recently, Cannibal Abduction. You can check out the long play I did for Halloween. Unfortunately, Tyrants Realm doesn't fully commit to that style as much as Cannibal Abduction does. The PS1 or Nintendo 64 era vibes aren't as easy to capture as you might think, and simply rendering the game at a lower resolution and making your 3D models warp and wobble doesn't really cut it. The retro vibes are in the sound design, the details of the UI, the peculiarities of the controls, and some other cheesy stuff the games used to do back then. Although Tyrants Realm greatly benefits from not looking like just another grim dark fantasy hack and slash, the retro style does look a little bit half-baked, especially if you've tried other modern games with this retro-inspired visual style. I personally kept the vertex snapping effect, but ended up disabling the CRT filter and the extra pixelation, because the game just ended up looking super weird and muddy with all that stuff on. At least they do give you the option to disable the effects. But I still gotta give the devs some credit, the texturing work and animations do look satisfyingly vintage, and some areas do look pretty cool with the whole PSX style of graphics. It's always better to try something weird with the visuals than to just download a bunch of photorealistic assets from the Unity store. Now, roguelites are all about gradual progression, feeling like every death makes you stronger and every run brings new and exciting possibilities. So, how does Tyrants Realm achieve this? The main progression system in Tyrants Realm is about unlocking new pieces of gear. As you kill enemies, break furniture and loot chests, you can find gear blueprints and gold coins. In between areas you can find the merchant, where you can spend your gold coins to permanently unlock armor sets, weapons and shields featured in the blueprints you've previously found. Unlocked items will then drop throughout your run and will randomly spawn in the starting room, giving you a small starting advantage. Some of the weapons and armors come with passive buffs or active abilities, like for example the Hunter's Belt, which gives you the ability to throw axes, or the Thief's Garbs, which allow you to loot enemy corpses for extra gold. At the merchant, you can also unlock shortcuts that will let you bypass some stages and take alternative routes to the final level. During a run, you'll also find these altars that give you a choice of runes, which boost your gear stats for the duration of the run. The new weapons and armors you unlock will make you more powerful and give you better chances of reaching and defeating the final boss. However, there are no crazy gear modifiers, OP weapons, or special abilities that can snowball you to the finish line. I would say that beating Tyrants Realm is about 20% gear and 80% combat skill. Much like in From Software Souls games, you have to learn your enemy's attack patterns, get used to the timing of parrying and rolling, and finding the right windows to get your shots in without getting hit back. Unfortunately, while it does make sense that a Souls-inspired roguelite would prioritize combat knowledge over gear and abilities, the shallowness of these other systems make Tyrants Realm feel like an incomplete roguelite. The gear unlock system isn't very exciting, the RNG elements are also pretty basic, the rune buffs are boring, I think Tyrants Realm would have greatly benefited from much bigger areas with more enemies and more chaotic action, which would then justify having crazier weapons and armors, impactful gear modifiers, special abilities, and also more progression systems. But as it is, Tyrants Realm perpetually feels like you're playing the Undead Asylum level of Dark Souls 1 on repeat. It's just very basic in every way. And so far I've been mostly referring to how the progression feels, but the combat, one of the core aspects of the game, also feels very watered down. If you're a Souls veteran, you'll see what I mean the second you engage your first couple of enemies. Not that you would expect a smaller indie studio to be able to replicate the clockwork precision of From Software's Souls games, but Tyrants Realm is missing some of the tightness and rhythm that make those other games feel so satisfying. For starters, there's no dedicated parry button. Parrying is done by raising your shield as your enemy is about to hit you, and the animations and timing just feels off, meaning you'll both be struggling to land parries and you're going to be landing parries accidentally. Another thing that constantly throws me off as somebody who played a lot of Dark Souls is how you can't take advantage of getting behind your enemies to stab them in the back for extra damage. Not that this happens regularly, since enemies in Tyrants Realm are big fans of tracking. Tracking, by the way, is when an enemy is able to unnaturally lock onto you, resulting in unfair attacks. It feels like enemies cheat a little bit, but what feels especially weird is how inconsistent staggering is. Usually when you play a Souls game using big weapons against smaller enemies, or if you land a heavy attack and the enemy is in the middle of an attack animation, generally the enemies will be interrupted and they will stagger. This rewards you for using heavier equipment or being able to deal big damage in a short amount of time. Now, in Tyrants Realm, enemy staggering is incredibly inconsistent. Sometimes they will stagger when getting stabbed once with a weak sword, and sometimes you can strike them 3 or 4 times while they are winding up their attack animation and they don't get interrupted. This may be hard to understand for somebody who doesn't play Souls games, but it does make the combat feel very inconsistent and sometimes unfair. So, the progression is very basic, the gear system is boring, the combat is inconsistent. Well, the boss fights also aren't much better. The first time you fight a boss, it does give you that Souls-like experience of having to learn the moves of the boss and figuring out when it's safe to attack and when you have to fall back. But you'll end up fighting the same bosses 3, 4, 10, 30 times before you beat the game. By the second or third fight, the bosses are already super predictable and it just feels like they are a temporary roadblock on your way to the final boss. The DLC does add a little bit of extra variety to the base game in the form of armors, weapons, and a couple new bosses. And I do like the aesthetics of the jungle areas and the new tribal gear, but it's not exactly new content, it's just more of what you already have. You can see everything Tyrants Realm has to offer in about 2 or 3 hours of gameplay. The rest is just repetition until you beat the Tyrant in the final level, and then you unlock New Game Plus, which is just a higher difficulty level for everything that you've already been doing so far. Ultimately, I would say Tyrants Realm is a decent start for these indie developers, but for a roguelite, it should have had a lot more content, interesting RNG mechanics, and better progression systems. I could even forgive the combat flaws entirely if only there was something else to keep me entertained. But as it stands, I would say Tyrants Realm is about a 5 out of 10 game that begs for some sort of sequel to capitalize on all the untapped potential the game has. But before I go, I would like to point out that I did go scavenging for more info on Team Tyrant, the developers of Tyrants Realm. Turns out they have this itch.io page with what looks like a fully playable prototype for Tyrants Realm called Tyrants Realm Origins. I downloaded it and played it for a while, and I actually enjoyed some aspects of this prototype more than the fully realized game. Mostly because instead of having these small blocky rooms meant for random level generation, Tyrants Realm Origins actually has these larger, handcrafted levels that are more complex to navigate and where you can talk to NPCs, for example. It gives me this feeling that Tyrants Realm would have worked much better as a full-on, story-driven Souls-like instead of a roguelite dungeon crawler. But that's just an idea for Team Tyrant. Maybe in the future we'll see some more Tyrants Realm. hopefully with a little bit more content and a little bit more polish. But for now, it is what it is. Don't forget to leave a like and a sub here on the channel and follow me on all the socials. I also want to thank everybody who showed up to watch the last video, my Dead Island review. That video has completely broken all previous viewership records and it's been really great for the channel. Let me know down in the comment section whether you prefer AAA game reviews or these more indie recommendations, and also I'll be in the comment section replying to your comments and suggestions. But for now, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.